Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So yesterday we finished the part that talks about somebody who woke up in a state of janaba in Ramadan, and that it's like a consensus that there's no problem. He does the ghusl and continues with the fasting. This hadith of Abu Huraira that we read yesterday, a couple of comments on it before we go on. The narrator is Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Bakr. Sorry, it's Abi Bakr ibn Abdul Rahman. So he's not the Abu Bakr Siddiq. His name is Abu Bakr ibn Abdul Rahman. It says here, radiallahu anhu, I think he is a Sahabi, but it's not the Abu Bakr that we know. Him and his father Abdul Rahman are the people. Got confused yesterday because Abu Bakr Siddiq has a son whose name is Abdul Rahman. So here this man is Abu Bakr ibn Abdul Rahman. Yeah. Al-Makhzumi. Now, from Bani Makhzum. So he is the one who debated with Abu Huraira, him and his son both, who went and asked Sayyidah Aisha Salama, and they've informed them that Prophet ﷺ used to wake up after in a state of janaba, which is a major defilement, and he would just continue fasting, does the ghusl and go on. And they said that they started. Scholars tried to answer, how did Abu Huraira get it wrong here? Definitely he got it wrong, and everybody basically said that the Sahaba said that he got it wrong here. And Abu Huraira, I mean, obviously this was later on. It was at the time of Marwan ibn al-Hakam, so it was past the Khulafa al-Rashidin. This is a long time. This is past 30 or 40 years after the Hijrah, that Abu Huraira still had that kind of same opinion. So, and in some narrations he said that I heard it from Prophet ﷺ, while when they corrected him, he says, I think I heard it from Al-Fadl ibn Abbas. Okay, that's important. Why? Because we have to know that a narrator of hadith, no matter how prominent he is, there's still a possibility of mistake. And that is why to have supporting evidence, corroborating evidence from another narrator or another hadith to support it, it's very important, especially in important matters of deen. Even important matters of dunya, Allah said, وَاسْتَشْهِدُوا شَهِدَيْنِ مِنْ رِجَالِكُمْ. In a few dirhams or few dollars, and there's a debt between you and somebody, you want two witnesses, not one. فَإِن لَمْ يَكُنَّ رَجُلَيْنِ فَرَجُلٌ وَامْرَأَتَانِ. Okay, so and that is so important because, alhamdulillah, for the Quran, we are 100% sure it is a whole generation narrating the Quran from a generation. We have no doubt about any letter in it, and that's the foundation, the basic foundation. Some people, especially people who are specialized in hadith, they try to give Muslims the impression that the Sunnah is at the same level of the Quran, and that is totally unfair, and it's actually it goes against logic. It cannot be at the same level of the Quran. Even the Prophet ﷺ himself treated them differently, and as I mentioned to you before, he clearly stated to Sahaba early on not to write the Sunnah, but only to document the Quran initially. And he even said, if you wrote anything other than the Quran, you have to wipe it, erase it. He knew he was going to live to teach them how to apply the Quran, because the Sunnah, what is it but the practical application of the Quran and the clarification of the Quran in its essence. And practical matters are easy to remember finally, because people will practice it and it will be remembered. That's why Imam Malik, for instance, Imam Malik, in many cases, he would rely on something called Amal Ahl al-Madinah. What the people of Medina, the generation that learned from the generation that lived with the Prophet ﷺ, or from their grandfathers who lived with the Prophet ﷺ. Imam Malik was at the end of the first 100 years of Hijrah. So maybe 2 generations after the Prophet ﷺ. So he would put so much emphasis on Amal Ahl al-Madinah, how Ahl al-Madinah applied the deen. And he would actually not accept certain ahadith that went against the practical application and the practice of people of Medina. So important. I know some people might not like this opinion, but this is the reality, honestly. I mean, it's not my opinion. Imam Abu Hanifa, for instance, he would not also accept a hadith if he felt it went against a verse of the Quran, even if it was authentic, even if it looked authentic, the narration is fine. And the same for Imam Malik. They had to look at other aspects of it. It's the multiple. If it's mutawatir, for instance, there's no doubt about it. If it's at the same level of attestation as the Quran, such as many people from the generation narrated it, to the next and so on, yes, then obviously it's very strong evidence. But hadith wa ahad, that it's narrated by individuals, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, if it went against Amal Ahl al-Medina, what the people of Medina did, Imam Malik would not accept it. And he would say, no, he says, as-sunnatu indana. He says, this is the sunnah for us in Medina is such and such, different from what you guys are narrating. And that is why some people differentiated between what is called sunnah and what is called hadith. It's an important differentiation. And I think that will answer the question. Because sunnah means the way, a practical way, or something that is repeatedly followed. Way, it's a path. Sunnah means path. It is the trodden path. This is how people did things, repeatedly and repeatedly. And that becomes established. The way we pray, the way that we fast, the adhan that we do, things that people cannot get wrong, because this has been practiced in the same fashion from the time of the Prophet ﷺ till now. This is sunnah. Hadith is basically a narration. It may not be as well established as sunnah. Okay? Sunnah is something that is totally entrenched in the Muslim community, in the earlier community. I'm not talking today, because today you might find lots of deviation and innovation, bid'ah. But in the past, at the time of Imam Malik, no, people were still following the sunnah, how the Prophet ﷺ left them, the way of life that he showed them, how to practice religion was still established. Make that distinction very importantly, so that we don't get confused on basic principles in the religion. Okay, Imam Malik, for instance, Siyamu Sitta min Shawwal, to fast 6 days of Shawwal, he actually karihahu. He said it's makruh for him. It is not even mustahab. He says I dislike it, and that his basis was that he didn't feel this was a common practice in Medina. You follow, and that's why you see many things. Some scholars like imams, big imams of Islam, the founders of the schools of law, who are well accepted by the Muslims. This is another thing. If those people, for instance, Imam Abu Hanifa, what percentage of the Muslims are following him? You might find 1/4 of the Muslims are following Imam Abu Hanifa. He cannot be somebody who is deviant for 1/4 of the Muslims to follow him, right? Even though some of his opinions may go against some of the clear hadith we're having, because he felt that this hadith did not reach the level of authenticity that he would accept. He would then extract from the Quran what he thought was the most preponderant ruling. That's very important. Some other people went to the extreme and used a hadith like this to discredit Abu Hurairah, the ta'ni for Abu Hurairah. Some people use that. So you cannot go to that extreme or this extreme. Some people, you go to the extreme that people of hadith like Abu Hurairah or the Sahaba in general can never make a mistake, or Imam Bukhari can never make a mistake in hadith. He's a human being. We have to be, balanced and don't go to the extreme this way or that way. Abu Hurairah is well known for his piety and his righteousness and his dedication. Nobody can come because he made a mistake in hadith and disqualify him, right? That's haram, that's dhulm. And also at the same level, to claim that Abu Hurairah would never make a mistake, no. One time, a Sahabi, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, a very prominent Sahabi as well, he came, Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu sent him for some matter to call us another Sahabi from his house. So he knocked and came back. He says, I went and knocked on his door, and I knew he was there, but he didn't answer, so I came back. He says, why didn't you keep on knocking? He says to him, well, I heard the hadith from the Prophet ﷺ that you're only allowed to knock 3 times. If you are allowed in or you're answered, that is fine. Otherwise, you have to go. So I applied the hadith. I went. He says to him, bring me a witness that you heard this hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, or I'll hit you with this stick. So he went frantically looking for somebody as a witness. And alhamdulillah, he found somebody. What I'm trying to say is, even the Sahaba wouldn't just take a hadith like this at face value. Here is the same. They did not take the hadith at face value, and they argued with Abu Huraira that no, Salama and Aisha said differently, and they know better than you. Of course they know better than you in this matter, correct? So this is an important matter, that even at the time of the Sahaba they scrutinized any narration. The Quran, it's clear from the very beginning, the hadith needs more scrutiny and a balanced approach. Not everybody who says Qala Rasulullah, then it's a given. No. There's some fabricated hadith a person can forget. You need supporting evidence to reach that kind of conclusion. Otherwise, you'll find your religion so many contradicting views, because one hadith will tell you this and one hadith will tell you that. Then you have to sort out which one is the right one. Okay. We'll go to the next point real quick here. ما يباح للصائم, what a fasting person is allowed to do, or the kind of things he's allowed to do everything except the things that are forbidden for a fasting person, but some things we may get confused about. And we mentioned the one that if he wakes up in a state of janaba, he mentioned here, I don't know why he mentioned the ghusl. It's obviously clear that the ghusl means to have a wash, even للتبرد, even if you're feeling so thirsty that you wanted to cool yourself with some water, that's also okay. There's no problem about that. Okay. عن أبي بكر قال الذي حدثني لقد رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بالعرج يصب على رأسه الماء وهو صائم من العطش أو من الحر. See, that's as I mentioned to you, the Sahaba used to narrate from each other. Not every Sahabi who told you قال رسول صلى الله عليه وسلم means he heard it directly from Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, and that's perfectly fine. This is called mursal al-Sahabi. A Sahabi narrating something directly attributing to Prophet ﷺ, although he did not hear it from him. At the time of the Sahaba, that's acceptable. Okay? Beyond the level of the Sahaba, it's not acceptable anymore. Because by that time, the rules of hadith were set, and the people of hadith indicated that if you tell me, for instance, Abu Huraira said that and he didn't say that, second generation, if his second generation says Abu Huraira said so and he didn't hear it directly from him, then that's called tadlis. Tadlis means he's hiding something. But at the time of the Sahaba, Anas ibn Malik says, ما كل ما حدثناكم سمعناه من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بل كان يحدث بعضنا بعضا ولا يتهم بعضنا بعضا. The meaning is that not everything we are narrating to you, we heard it directly from Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, because we used to hear from each other. And none of us had any kind of doubt or suspicion about the other. Al-Bara ibn Azib said the same thing. So this was the common practice. Here Abu Bakr says, قال الذي حدثني. He doesn't even remember who it was. He says, but it has to be a Sahabi, because Abu Bakr is one of the senior Sahaba. He died after Prophet ﷺ by about 2 years. So it cannot be a Tabi'i, of course, who told him. It has to be one of the Sahaba. He says, the one who informed me, said that he saw the Prophet ﷺ pouring water on his head in a very hot day while he was fasting, just to cool down, So why do they mention these points? Because some people may say, oh, maybe I'm not allowed to do that because, maybe I have to suffer. No, you don't have to suffer. You just have to apply what Allah told you to do. Don't eat or drink. But if somebody is going to get sick, actually sick from the fasting, he's become hypotensive, get a heat stroke or something, no, he's not allowed to continue fasting. He's not allowed to. He has to break his fast because he is a marid. He's fallen into the category of the sick person. Okay? Some people may get a vicious headache and start vomiting, getting sick, migraines. Some people have migraines. If they miss a meal, they can get into that. It depends on how severe the condition is. Everybody has to gauge their own status. But if somebody gets extremely sick like this, then he falls into the category of marid. We cannot tell him, no, you have to fast, even if you get sick. No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him that excuse. Even Allah gave the traveler an excuse, even though it might be easy for him and not a problem. But Hanabila said, even if it's easy for him, still better for him to take that excuse, right? We mentioned that. Let me mention one more point. Al-madmada wal-istinshaq min ghayr mubalagha. We'll stop at this point. He's allowed to, of course, put water in his mouth, even if he's doing that, by the way, because his mouth feels so dry. But he's not allowed to swallow any drop, of course. But if he's going to wet the lips or put water in his mouth, it's allowed. Because we do that anyhow. Why? Where do we do that? In wudu, of course. Somebody say, oh no, you'll have to do it. You're doing it already. Several times a day you're doing it. Okay. Al-istinshaq as well, to snort in water, min ghayri mubalagha, without taking it too deep when you're fasting. You can do it otherwise. Actually, it's sunnah to do it deeply otherwise, but not while fasting. You have to do it lightly, because there's a hadith on this matter. أسبغ الوضوء وبالغ في الاستنشاق إلا أن تكون صائما. حديث لقيط ابن صبرة. هذا authentic hadith. Prophet ﷺ was teaching him how to make wudu. He says, أسبغ الوضوء, perfect your wudu, وبالغ في الاستنشاق, and take the water deeply in, snort the water deeply in your nose, except when you are fasting. The precaution here, obviously, because you're not supposed to do it while you are fasting too deeply. Let me tell you what the scholars said about this. If somebody actually does it and water reaches his throat, what is the ruling here? اختلف الفقهاء. Some of them said that if he's not exaggerating in snorting the water in, then, and even if the water reaches his throat, his fasting is still okay. Because he did what the hadith told him. This is the opinion of Al-Hanabila and one of the two opinions of Madhab al-Shafi'i. And frequently you'll find in the Madhab 2 or 3 or even 4 opinions. That's okay. Because different scholars in that Madhab, the prominent scholars, they can vary from the first Imam, and they might have the same weight of the Imam, so that their opinion is adopted as an opinion in the Madhab as well. Okay? And Ibn Hazm as well, al-Zahiri, you'll find frequently al-Zahiriyya and Hanabila are frequently on the same page. and frequently they differ from other madhahib, the Malikiyya, Shafi'iyya. Frequently you find that trend, because they took things literally and they relied heavily on the ahadith. And they had, and since Imam Ahmad and both madhahib came later, they had the availability of hadith more than some of the earlier Imams, Imam Malik, Abu Hanifa, Shafi'i. They were before them. Okay, so وقال الطائفة, and some of them said no, if the water reaches the throat, his fasting is done, regardless if he did it excessively or normally. And this is the opinion of second opinion in Madhab al-Shafi'i. This is the opinion of al-Malikiyya and Hanafiyya. So Ahnaf and the followers of Imam Malik, or the school of Imam Malik, because it is a follower of the madhab, the whole madhab of the school itself. That's what they said. But if he didn't know, لو كان ناسيا أو جاهلا لم يفطر. If he didn't know that, of course, in general, in Sharia, if you're forgetting or you did something unknowingly, then mistakenly, then there's no blame on you. Then your fasting is okay. And here, then she mentions from the books that talk about these madhahib, but let me show you what she chose here. The author of the book, Tamim, she says, والذي ينشرح له الصدر وتطمئن إليه النفس ما ذهب إليه الحنابلة وابن حزم وهو إحدى الروايتين عن الإمام الشافعي أن من تمضمض واستنشق من غير مبالغة ولا إسراف فسبق الماء إلى جوفه لم يفطر لأنه فعل ما أمر به النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من عدم المبالغة كما جاء في الحديث ولم يتعمد. So basically this is the opinion that she chose, that if he did it regularly, not excessively, and he was careful and the water reached his throat, there is nothing on him. I think that's a very strong opinion. This makes perfect sense. It's following the hadith to the letter. And while, of course, if he did it excessively and he didn't follow the hadith and he knew about the hadith and the water reached the throat, then the fasting is gone and he would have to. That's a very important point, because we're all liable to have something like this happen to us. It's a common thing, okay? And basically the same thing that applies here applies to the drops in the nose, nasal drops. Nasal drops, if the taste reaches the throat, obviously the Sharia considers this passage and this passage, those passages are natural passages for eating and drinking, or if something goes through these passages into your jawf, into your inside, the Sharia considers those as pathways for iftar, for breaking the fast. And that's actually, this is even medically right. When they want to give the patient some feeding and he can't feed through the mouth, what do? Nasogastric tube, right? Through the nose. These are natural passages to the stomach. And then the stomach breaks down the food, it goes into its intestine. So this is how it is. As for the unnatural passage, such as rectally, that's not a natural, normal passage to the intestines. And that is why, although we'll come to this, حقنة الشرجية, such as an enema, what do you do with the enema? Or, if somebody, in our countries we don't use toilet paper, we use water, bidets, right? The bidets, and these are more common in our countries than here. And sometimes the water also goes on the inside if the stream of the gushing of the water is strong, right? That's very common. So what is the ruling here? I'll just tell you shortly before we get to this. There's nothing on that. It doesn't break your fast, but you have to know that most imams said it does break the fasting.
Really?
Yes. but there's no evidence to this. There's no hadith or ayah that says that. That's their opinion. If it's an opinion, you're allowed to have your own opinion. If it's an opinion, and not ours, of course, Ibn Taymiyyah and others said no, it doesn't break the fast. But alhamdulillah, we have other imams that who are at that same level, who have brought us other opinions that go against. But most imams said no, it breaks the fasting. Even the rectal passage of any water will break the fast. So no, we should avoid nasal drops. And frequently nasal drops are not life-saving in medicine. Most nasal drops, you don't need them to save your life. You can wait. Usually people use nasal drops for some nasal allergies, some simple stuff, right? So we can wait till after iftar on that one. Okay. And also we mentioned you have to be careful with your istinshaq. That's an important point, and we'll continue some other time. Stop here, inshallah.
So I didn't know the difference between the sunnah and the hadith. So it's good to know that a person can follow the sunnah, but they can.
And see that differentiation. Actually, an Indian scholar by the name of Amin Islahi, he's a famous big scholar in India, and he has a huge tafsir called Pondering Over the Quran, Tadabbur al-Quran. It's like in 10 volumes. He wrote a book. I have actually this book on my phone right now. I was going through this book. It solves so many problems in our heads because narrations can sometimes conflict with each other. An individual from here narrates the Prophet ﷺ said so and so, another one said something else. It doesn't become sunnah, because if it was an established practice, they would not differ amongst them. It was something so recurrent and so well known, they would not differ. And this it's not an invention of Amin Islahi. Many other scholars of hadith have made that distinction. And even scholars of hadith have made the hadith mutawatir, hadith ahad. Why did they make that kind of distinction between al-mutawatir, which would become sunnah basically? Mutawatir means multiply attested hadith. Why did they make the distinction between hadith mutawatir or hadith ahad, which is the one that's narrated by individuals? Obviously there's a difference. And if there's a contradiction between hadith mutawatir and hadith ahad, which one do you take? Of course, the mutawatir right away. And if there's a conflict between a verse in the Quran, a conflict that you cannot reconcile between a verse in the Quran and a hadith that's in Bukhari and Muslim, for instance, which one will you take? Of course the Quran, right? As long as this verse cannot be understood except in such a way, and this hadith cannot be understood, and there's no way of reconciling. You have to look at evidence is graded. You cannot have all evidence at the same level. Even the hadith of Sahih and Hasan. Hasan means just acceptable. Sahih means authentic. Which one do you take? You'll take the Sahih. If you cannot reconcile. If you can reconcile and go in harmony, it's better. Okay? If you can reach an understanding that will gather all this evidence in one, that's the way to go. But scholars said there's like 40 different parameters and criteria of making tarjih, to basically weigh evidence against each other. They look at 40 different points. That's a very difficult science. Not everyone is well versed in this kind of science. Okay, so we'll stop here.